Good morning. I'm Jody Slider, and I'm with SACS. I'm a program specialist, and we welcome you to our session, Know Just Enough About SACS to Be Dangerous. My co-presenters, I'll let them introduce themselves as well. Steve?
Yeah, good morning. I'm Steve Thompson, also program specialist with SACS. And my role here really is to support Jody, because this is nothing that I really feel that I knew about when I was administrator, but it's more of I wish I had known about it. So my introduction is to say that when Jody started talking about this stuff, I said, we need to share this. And that's really where this came from.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Diana Batista, and I'm a education program consultant with California Department of Education. I just started there, about 2 months ago. So I'm using the information that I always used as an administrator, and I'll be coming in with just a couple of tips to follow up on how the SACS codes might apply to you in your position. Welcome. Good morning.
So on Friday, it's a little tough sometimes to be talking about numbers and talking about budgets. So you are all so brave to be here at 8:30 in the morning, ready to talk about numbers. So let's go ahead and get started. I'll start by sharing my screen. And hopefully you can all see that now. And we'll go ahead with our agenda, and I'll turn it over to Steve. Here's our contact information so that if you need to reach us, and you can always do so in at the end of this. Steve?
Just one thing before we get started.
Okay.
Steve, if anyone has any questions, you can go ahead and put them in the chat. I'll monitor the chat, but we could also, if you raise your hand, we could also have you come off camera if you prefer to speak.
Yeah, that's a good point, Diana. Thank you. We really want to address your questions as they come up. So feel free to jump right in and ask your questions as they come up, because sometimes it's hard to hold on to those. Thanks, Diana.
Okay, so like I said, really, this is all the stuff that I wish I had known about SACS as administrator. And I feel that by the time you come to the end of this presentation, you'll be in a better position, first of all, to communicate between you and your financial department. It'll kind of level the playing field, so to speak. Whereas when you're in a position that they say, oh, you can't do that, well, you're in a more position to say, well, yes, I can, or at least understand why they're not saying you can't do that. Obviously, it'll allow you to better plan and monitor your expenditures, and especially make sure you avoid things like supplanting. And the big one is bullet number 3, is that it enables an apples to apples comparison of CAPE and ABS, CAPE and WIOA funding, because we know those are combined differently. And when it comes to your ECR and you have to report the in-kind, you always have this dilemma about how you're going to do that. And finally, of course, it is your responsibility as an administrator to understand this stuff. So the better able you are to do that, the better able you are to fulfill your duties. Next slide, please. Jody,
okay,
next slide.
Are you on to better communications there, Steve?
Yes, I just finished that.
Okay.
Yeah, pretty much. I covered all that. Yeah.
Great. Okay. So really, we're going to touch on some basics for SACS today, which is the acronym for Standardized Account Code Structure. So basically, just to define what that information is SACS code system is a statewide universal financial reporting system that is used in California, not just with adult education. I don't know why that happens sometimes, with adult education, but also with your districts. So across the board, districts and county offices use the SACS system for accounting and for keeping fiscal and financial activities organized, reporting, etc. So this is a system we're going to be talking about today. It's all defined in our California School Accounting Manual. There's a link there for it. So when you receive the PowerPoint, or if you go and pull it down, you can go to the actual manual and go into all of those 606 pages of details of lots of various things. But section 300 really defines the SACS chart of accounts, and that's really the part you're going to look at. The 22-digit account code is what SACS is comprised of. Those are comprised of 9 different elements. Those elements we're going to go into detail on, and we'll talk more about them. But 7 of those elements are required, not all 9, but there are some optional ones that we'll also discuss. The thing to remember about the SACS codes is that in a local system, they could be in a different order or a different sequence. And I ran into this going from one agency to another. I had to get used to my new agency's order or sequence in the SACS code. So that's something to keep in mind, that the sequence could be different, but the elements are consistent. So let's look at those elements and what the structure is. So these are the 7 required elements that are listed in the manual, and they include fund, resource, project year, goal, function, object, and school. So we're going to define those, and we're going to go into detail a little bit about that as in the subsequent slides. It keeps going progressing on me. Okay, the X's at the bottom of or in the next line there shows you how many digits there are in each of those elements. So there's 2 in funding, in fund, 4 in resources, 1 in project year, 4 in goals, 4 in function, 4 in object, and 3 in school. Those are the typical number of digits within each of those elements. Sometimes there's a few variations of that. So you may run into a variation from time to time with that, with the number of digits. Sometimes project year could be a couple of digits, but that's generally how many digits you'll find in the structure of these elements. Okay, so let's dive into some of the details now of the elements and what the definitions are under each one. And you may already be familiar with many of these elements and what their definitions are. It could be, and these are definitions that I pulled out of the manual. So, but of course, I kind of paraphrased because the manual is extremely long and very, very detailed. So we're going to kind of touch on some generalities today. The fund section right there that you see on the far left is typically a 2-digit fund number, and it includes, or it is defined as the fiscal and accounting entity with a self-balancing set of accounts. What's really important to understand there is that it's self-balancing. When you set up a fund, or when your accounting department sets up a fund, every year they've got to make sure that those funds are self-balancing, that the expenditures and the income or resources balance out to equal the same amount, so that there is a plan for expending those funds. That's why sometimes if you have monies that are left over or carryover, that is included in your budget, and you'll still plan for expending some of those. Sometimes your accounting departments will expect you to plan to expend them, but it doesn't mean that you can't expend them, or that you have to expend them, that you can't have a carryover. As we know with CAPE funding, there is carryover is allowable at this point, and a very hot topic at this point as well. The next column is resources. Resources is really the point of where those funds are coming from, or the entity that the source of how those funds are being received by your agency or by the school district, and how they are intended to be spent. Some of those resources can either be state or federal restricted or non-restricted, and we'll talk about some of those as we go on. But it's really about how those funds are spent, what the plan is for spending those funds within the fund itself. Project year identifies the reporting year for that project. And sometimes there are more than one project here, so that digit can change. Diana, is there a question? No? Okay. The next column is goal. The goal defines the group of students who are receiving the services or the instructional setting for those learning objectives. So that really is what focuses what those funds are about. Who's being served and who is receiving the services, the instruction is all within that goal element. Function is the next one that defines or describes the activities and the services that are being performed for that fund. So if and there's two primary ones, but there are several other ones, and we'll talk in more detail about the function in the next slide. Object codes, the 4-digit object code classifies the type of expenditures that are being used, such as salaries, benefits, materials and supplies, agreements, consulting agreements, services. All of those are included in the object code. And so there's a whole long list of those, and those you're probably most familiar with, or you'll be utilizing most of the time when you're creating budgets and when you're defining how you're going to spend your funds based on your employee costs, based on materials and supplies that you need to purchase, based on benefits. All of that is included in those object codes. The next digit or element here is the school. Each school has a digit, and in this case, I'm showing 3 digits. There are some schools that have 4 digits simply because the district is large enough that it has more than 3-digit codes. But it identifies the school or the school site or the office for which those funds are being utilized. And then the last code that I included in this slide is the program code. This is an optional, a locally defined optional code that you can use that can identify the program that's being served to those students. And it can help you to track your expenditures to that group of or within that program. So this might be something that you'll consider as you're looking at your budgets. I'm sure you've already established your budgets for this year, but as you go forward, you may want to incorporate program into your schema for identifying your expenditures in your budget. It's just a way of separating out different programs. So one example might be that in WIOA, ESL and ABE are combined into one resource, but you'd like to separate those two out because in CAPE, ABE and ASE are combined in the same resource. So by identifying your ABE program, you can then separate out your expenditures and your budget for within those resources and not be in violation of the mandate of keeping with the funds in the same resource. As you know, you can't move funds from one resource to another unless if it's restricted. So that's one way of identifying what the income and expenditures could be within that resource. Any questions so far? We've talked about a lot so far.
No questions in the chat.
Oh, go ahead, Steve.
No, I said no questions in the chat.
Yeah.
Okay. All right, so let's dive deeper into some of the elements that you're going to be, you'll need to be responsible for or be familiar with on an ongoing basis, because that kind of helps you to really see what's going on there. So the first one that you'll want to really focus on is resources. Resources are created all the time by CDE, and depending upon when new funding structures come into play, when when things go obsolete, some of them kind of disappear, but they are created all the time. So don't be surprised when you get a new resource. That's not unusual. The resource also can be tracked, whether it's restricted or non-restricted. And I mentioned this earlier, and it's kind of important to really note what's restricted in which resources and what's not, because that's really the guidelines that you're going to follow when utilizing the funds that have been earmarked for your programs. So restricted funds are or unrestricted funds are in the 000 4-digit category, 0000 through 1999. And restricted funds are in the 2000s through the 9999. So all the others are restricted funds. The federal restricted are 3000s through the 5999. So right around that group are all the federal restricted funds. Then state restricted funds are the 6000s through the 7999. Now you'll notice that CAPE funds are, and we'll get into this, but you'll recognize 6391, and that's under the state restricted because those funds are restricted for adult education. Then restricted funds that are locally identified as restricted funds are in the 8000s and the 9000 categories. So that's kind of the breakdown of how restricted versus non-restricted funds go. All resources are required for revenues and for expenditures. So if you're to submit a expenditure report or identify a revenue that you're going to receive, got to have a resource. It's just a required element. So knowing where it's from so that you proceed properly and with the proper use of those funds, as well as your accounting department. And as I mentioned before, they've got to be balanced they're like a mini fund. There can't be any negative balances, even though you may have funds in another resource that are going to pay for part of that. Then you need to identify that in your expenditures that partially paid for with WIOA funds versus partially paid with CAPE funds, etc. So your resources can't have a negative fund balance at the end of the day. The goal is also required for all expenditures, and it identifies for whom those expenditures are intended. So with general adult education, you're probably familiar with 4110, which is the majority of regular adult education programs. 4610 is adult independent study centers. 4620 is for corrections. And but anyway, all of the goals in adult education are between the range of 4,000 to 4749. So all of your goals are going to fall within that. Most of them, for most of you will be 4110. The function category is in a range of 1,000 to 1999. And it's so all functions fall within those digits, and primarily you're going to utilize 1000s and 2700s. Those are probably the most significant ones. The 2000s through 2999 are administrative or instruction related function. So 1000s, you're probably all familiar with 1100, which is a permanent teacher function. And that's the what that's being provided. That's the instruction that's being provided. Or maybe you utilize 1130, which is hourly instruction. As I mentioned before, 2700 is for administrative costs or instruction related. What's important to note there is that 2700 doesn't pertain simply to administrator salaries, but also to administrative costs that are instruction related. So when you're budgeting and you're planning for professional development, you're going to plan for those under 2,700 because that's a function that is instruction related, not direct instruction itself. So those are three of the elements kind of at a deeper level: resources, goals, and function. Any questions so far?
I don't
Nope.
see any questions, but it's eerily quiet. I feel like I need to channel my Jay Wright. Is everyone still here? Are you following along? Because she just rolled off a lot of numbers. Can we get something in the chat? Okay, good. We're listening.
Anybody-
Right.
Good, thank you.
It's Friday. It's a tough day to listen to numbers. I'll try to perk it up just a little bit.
It's good information.
Let's look at a couple other elements, another slide on some details of those elements, and then we'll get into some examples, and maybe this will be a little bit more entertaining or a little bit more interesting. I like this slide because object codes they're the primary focus of what, as an administrator, I worked or used all the time, thinking about how to balance out all of my incomes and expenditures and to budget properly through all of the accounts that we had. And the object code is really kind of the detail that we would get to. So looking at object codes, your object codes for expenditures go from 1,000s to 7,000s. And there on our slide here, we have them listed on what falls into which category. So you can see that the 1,000s are certificated salaries, 2,000s are classified or support staff salaries, 3,000s are all employee benefits for each of those two salaries listed above. The 4,000s are all your books and supplies. 5,000s are for services and other operating costs, such as consulting or contracts that you might employ for your agency. 6,000 are capital outlays, and 7,000s are other outgoes, or what you might also recall is indirect costs. So indirect costs fall under that 7,000 category. Typically 85% of your budget, and this isn't standard or a requirement, but just so that you know, but typically 85% of your budget is going to be spent on those first three categories: your salaries and your benefits. Doesn't always come out that way, but that's typically where our the majority of our funds are spent. Capital outlay in the 6,000 categories is allowable under CAPE, but it is not allowable under WIOA. So as you plan your budgets and you have need for capital outlay purchases of equipment that falls under capital outlay, or buildings, etc., that's going to fall under your 6,000s, and that you'll need to utilize funds other than your WIOA funds. The program element that is optional, and I mentioned that before, is program down below. But before that, I should mention revenues. Isn't that what it's all about? Like, where do we put our money? Well, we put the monies that we receive in our revenues, and those fall under object codes 8,000s through 8,999. So if you're tracking your federal funds or your state funds, those are the categories where you're going to find receipt of those funds. So you can always look up under your financial activity reports or whatever system your district uses, you can check to see if those funds have been received. Then as I started to mention, the program is that optional or local element that can be utilized for identifying programs and where those funds, expenditures, and where those funds might be. So again, one way that we did in the past, use that program area element was to identify the ABE costs, so that when we went into reporting, we were able to see what ABE costs we had as opposed to our ESL or ASC. So it's just another way of drilling down rather than just estimating how those costs and how those expenditures lay out. Okay, so those are the primary elements. The only one that I didn't mention is Fund 11. Fund 11 is all of adult education, so that's kind of straightforward. So let's look into the codes and how they're related to adult education. So here's, you see our progression in the chart there. The fund resource, all the names of the elements are at the top. Then how many digits are falling into each of those elements and what those expected number of digits there might be. And then the next row are some typical codes that are related to adult education. So this might now start to look a little familiar to you. So as I mentioned before, adult education is general fund is 11. That's the adult education fund that is a restricted fund. General education for a school district is usually typically 0-1. So those are some numbers that you would find in a accounting code. And here at the very bottom, it has the same definition that I had in the other slide there. So under your resources, here's some very common resources that should be familiar to you. 3905, 3913, 3926, 3940, 6391, and 6371. All of those are typical adult education resources that many of us use, if use some of or all of. The 39s are all WIOA or federal funds. If you'll recall, the restricted funds fall under the lower numbers of the resources there, and the 6s are the state restricted. So they're federal restricted and state restricted. Project here, a common number usually used is 0 unless the project is an extended project for over more than 1 year. Goals, adult ed goals are between 4,000s and 4749. And as I mentioned before, 4110 is a common typical for general adult education goals. Functions fall under 1,000 typically for instruction or 2,700 for administrative or non-instructional activities. And then under object code, I have the X's beyond that. Those can be lots of different digits. So in 1,000s would be 1100, 1130, can be lots of different combinations depending on the positions that are being supported by your adult education funds. 2s also, lots of different positions. 2s are your classified personnel, and it will include secretaries and administrative assistants, clerks, registrars, your custodial staff, security staff, and many, many, many more. So all of the 2s have, each position typically has a different code that will help you to identify what the expenditures are for that particular activity. The 3,000s have multitude of benefits that are supported with your salaries, and they are all, they each have a different code number. So that will include your FICA, your Social Security numbers, your medical and benefits, all of the benefits that come out of workers' compensation, all of those benefits that come out of your budget that you're also paying for. are included in the 3,000s. The 4,000s we talked about, there's a whole bunch of service or books and supplies and materials and costs that would be included in your 4,000s. 5,000s, we talked about services. Then 6,000s, your capital outlay, and then those 8,000s we reviewed earlier. So all of your object codes are all in that one element. And depending upon which object code you use, identifies exactly what those funds are intended to do. Your school digit, I used our old school digit there. Again, your every school has a unique number for its identifier. Might be 2, might be 3 digits, could even be 4 digits. That's just an example there. And then under program, it's a 4-digit element. And here's some examples. They don't have to, they're agency or locally defined, so you can create whatever local numbers you choose to, and define those fields to identify the program that is serving those students, to help you to then kind of drill down a little deeper into some of those resources.
Jody, before you go on, we do have a question.
Okay.
Someone asked, what are the codes 3926 and 3940? Now, someone answered 3926 is the EL Civics, but would you talk a little bit more about 3940 and maybe the 6371?
Actually, Deanna, it's not EL Civics, it's IET. It's integrated EL Civics.
Yes,
Oh,
it
thank
is. Yeah. So 3926 is integrated ESL. So it's IET, IELCE. 3940, I'll bet there's somebody in the audience that knows who that is. I'd love to draw that out of someone. And 6371. Somebody knows what those are.
We got 6371. Someone came up with CalWorks.
All right. Okay. Somebody gets a star. Yes, that's CalWorks funding that's specific for adult education. How about 3940?
That was.
I don't know 3940, so that's a new one for me.
That was
39.
Kathy Walker.
Nobody?
Someone said, is 3940 corrections, the jail programs?
No. Oh, actually, yes, it is. Yes, it is. Corrections. 3940 is corrections. Yes.
And I have
Okay.
one other question before you go on. You've been mentioning that the 4,000s are for books and supplies and things.
Yes.
So would that include something like software licenses and subscriptions?
It could. It really depends on the cost of those subscriptions. So 4,000 has a cap on the cost of each of those elements. And in fact, even 4,000s can include computers and devices as long as the cost is lower than what the ceiling is. So that that can be a little bit flexible there, but it could be your licenses as well. Yes.
Thank you. And Q-Chong from Sacramento County Office of Ed put in a great website from CDE for resource code queries. Thank you, Q.
Nice. Thank you. Appreciate the help. Okay, so now I want to take this and let's put it into action. So all of this information is great stuff, but until you use it, what good is it, right? So let's look at a sample budget, and we're going to look at and this is purely, for practice purposes. This isn't any budget of any organization or any agency or any consortium, but just numbers that are made up. So here's a sample budget for a CAPE allocation. And as you can see at the top of the table, there are program numbers that have identified those specific programs. You can see 4110 is identified as ESL, 4111 ABE, 4115 ASE, and 4117 as CTE. And we know that the resource code for CAPE allocation is 6391. So now we have the resource, we have the program, If you look over on the left, the second column to the left, you can see there's 1,000s, 2,000s, 3,000s, 4,000s, 5,000s, and 7,000s. And those are all our object codes, right? And we know the fund is Fund 11. So we've got half of the puzzle put together here. You'll notice that there isn't a 6,000 column there, but there could be. Knowing that this is a CAPE budget or a simulated CAPE budget, it could have 6,000s in there, but it doesn't in this example, just so that you know. So under those object codes, this is a fictitious budget for ESL, ABE, ASE, and CTE. You can see that the indirect is across the board, and that amount is, anybody know what the maximum percentage of indirect costs can be for CAPE funds? What's the maximum allowable indirect cost
Everybody's saying
percentage?
5%.
5%, exactly. Good. That's what I was looking for. So that's the maximum. Does it mean that you're going to pull, that your expense is going to be 5%? Not if your district allows less than that. So it is a maximum of 5%. So I used 5% in each of these examples. So in these funds, in the 6390 CAPE allocation, I used a 5%. Now, when you calculate the 5% out of each budget area or program, you back out the 5%. It isn't a straight 5%, because if you take a total and multiply 5% of it, you're going to get a different amount. So there is a specific calculation that you use to back out the 5% so that it is strictly 5% of the expenses there. And you'll notice that the fund total matches your total allocation, in this case of $298,078. Does this look kind of like a typical budget for some of you? Make sense? Hopefully. Okay. Well, let's move on, and now let's use that budget with this next slide, and let's talk about what that accounting line at the bottom that's in gold. Let's talk about what that means and what is that accounting code or that SACS code at the bottom identifying as an expenditure. So we have our fund, we have our resource. Program year typically 0 when it's the same year of the project. Our goal for general adult education is 4110. What does our function tell us? The number is 1,000. What does our function tell us?
We're getting some answers in the chat. Object code, certificated salaries, instruction related.
Instruction related, good. It is instruction related, okay? And so we know it's going to get to have something that connects with students. I used to tell myself, function, if it's a 1,000, if it touches a student in some way, shape, or form. Function means it's related to instruction. How about object code? Object code is 1130. Now we know it's instruction, so what would 1130 be? Anybody remember what 1130 stands for? Okay.
A
So
teacher
I'll give you a
salary?
hint.
Question.
Teacher
instruction?
salary, yes.
How
So
about
it's either
PD or meetings?
It's either hourly hourly instruction or hourly salary, or it's permanent salary. Which is it?
Hourly, guessing.
Awesome. Okay. And school, again, could be whatever school you have there. In this case, my example has 850, made up number for a school. And program, what program does this accounting code support? Which of the 4 programs that I have above?
I'm getting
does
adult secondary education.
adult secondary education? Outstanding. So you know that now that this code is CAPE funded. It's adult education, it's for instruction, hourly salary for the adult school in ASC. All right? It's
So
like
one
putting a
other quick
puzzle together.
question. Could
Yes,
the 1130 be used for hourly meetings or professional development?
yes, it can be but will your function change when it's hourly meetings and professional development? The function no longer is direct instruction, but it now falls into administrative support or an administrative function. So your function would change to 2700,
Right.
especially for professional development.
Yeah, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that a little later on. Just
Exactly. Very
some
soon.
use
in fact.
1120 for hourly instruction. That's okay.
So,
Yes.
so Jody, just to clarify then if you are paying teachers their hourly rate to attend professional development per se, then that falls under the 270, the 2700.
2700. Yes, it
Yeah.
does. So if you're,
Okay,
hopefully you can see my arrow on the slide.
I do.
Right
Yeah.
here under function, this would change to 2700 for professional development. And like Diana said, she's going to go into professional development when it comes to the function and administrative costs in just a little bit. So she's going to elaborate on that. Okay. All right. So you guys, you got this. This is easy stuff, right? Okay.
We have
So
a lot
now
of
Diana's-
requests to share the presentation and also that they would like the recording. So I hope we get a great
So
evaluation.
we have a comment about somebody saying that they use 1120 for hourly instruction.
Okay, 1120. If that's the number that's being given to you by your accounting department, then that's what you use.
Oh, okay, because someone else says we use 1161. So yeah, I guess that's why
Yeah.
there's a difference. Okay.
And it could be how they're defining that, and that's okay, but they're very, very similar. And as long as the object code is being identified by your agency, and that's the one that they want you to use, and that's what you use. Okay. All right. I'm going to turn it over to Diana, and she's going to go into some funding guidelines for CAPE and WIOA. Diana?
Just reading one more thing in the chat that other staff members would benefit greatly from this. So they're really hoping that we can share the recording. So just
Yeah,
remember
that's-
that the recordings
it-
are determined by the evaluation. So
No, but I think that I thought all the recordings were going to be available, but the videos that were going to be posted were determined by the evaluation. But I guess we can find that out.
yeah,
Yeah.
I'm not sure.
Okay.
And Lori is saying this should be part of the new administrator training every year. Well, that's right on cue, because Veronica
All right,
says we'll make sure
Veronica's
this recording
saying
is
that they
posted.
will post the recording. Thank you,
Thank you, Veronica. So those of you that attended the new administrator training, and one of my colleagues, Arturo Ambris, is here with us this morning. This might look familiar to you because this is what we use when we're doing the new administrator training. One of the things that I put there is a link to the presentation that was used at the caladulted.org site. And it includes the CAPE Fiscal Management Guide, which will show you the allowable uses for adult ed program funds. Now, for example, under CAPE, it's very important that you're serving students over age 18. And sometimes I get questions about, credit recovery and things like that. And the students have to be over age 18. And if you're serving students in a credit recovery with the comprehensive high school, you want to make sure that you're not using adult ed funds for that, but that should be supported as a concurrent student, should be supported by the district's LCFF funds. That's a little bit confusing, but I know I do get the question about that. This guide, the Cape Fiscal Management Guide, was last updated in June of 2021, and it does have a lot of good information there. And then we posted earlier, Steve posted the K-12 County Office California School Accounting Manual, the CSAM, they call it. And then also at that same site, at the caladulted.org site, are the guidance for community college budget and accounting, as well as the 2020 student attendance manual. I'm seeing some questions in the chat. Oh, it's just all the comments.
No, it's not questions, it's just
Okay,
comments.
great.
Yeah.
Okay, next slide. So I also want to point out that, you know, what Jody's been talking about has been general accounting practices. And she has made reference a couple of times to CAPE, California Adult Ed Program funding, and also to WIO, or Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act funding. They are different. They're federal funding and state funding. And the federal funding is supplemental funding. And you may not supplant your programs with WIOA federal funding. And what that means is that, and you can see it bold there, is that the idea of WIOA is to supplement an existing program, increase your level of services, and not replace any other state or local funds expended for adult education and literacy activities. So this is how you can maybe hire a few extra part-time or maybe even full-time teachers, but also maybe get additional supplies to use with the programs, whether it's, you know, some additional workbooks, some online resources, things like that. But the AFLA funds, the federal funds, should not be used to pay for services that would otherwise be paid with state and local funds. And this is really important, especially as the California Department of Education comes out with your federal monitoring. That is one of the things that we'll be looking for. Next slide, please. So the allowability of costs come from very specific rules. And we follow the federal guidelines as we're looking over your budgets and with the questions that you ask us at the California Department of Education. And I encourage you to please contact your consultants anytime you have a question. The things that we're going to be looking for with your expenditures, is this really necessary? Is it reasonable? Is it allocable? Can it be charged to the program with the benefits? Is it proportional? And how is it authorized? So we've already mentioned the WIOA, that's the Adult Ed Family Literacy Act. We also followed EDGAR. We all have our handy little, oh, it's not going to show up. We have our handy little books that give us some more of the regulations. And then other state and local laws and regulations. One of the important things that we'll be looking for is it adequately documented? And this is what I've encouraged people to do. As you're making these decisions, maybe you're using something that's multi-funded, some of it from 6391, some of it from WIOA. You want to write down what the percentages are and how you came up with that decision. You want to be able to show, if you're asked, how did you justify these expenses? And let me just go back again with the necessary. Can you demonstrate that this cost addresses and improves the existing need for the performance of the program? Again, AFLA is supplemental and you're using it to enhance your program. Okay, next slide. The financial records, you can read this. I know all of this, these records relevant to your federal award must be retained for a period of 3 years, and we want it to be clean documentation. Like I said, go ahead and attach a page of your notes showing how you came up with the decision to purchase this. And my colleague Arturo is posting in the chat a little bit more information on the supplement, not supplant, frequently asked questions. And anytime you're not sure, I've highlighted in red, ask your consultant with questions before you purchase. It's much easier for us to help you walk through whether or not this is a valid purchase than for you to have to explain and possibly return the funds and use another accounting to pay for that. Your general questions can be addressed here at the adult education at cde.ca.gov, or you can contact your consultant. I hope everyone knows how to reach your educational program consultant. And if not, you can go to that site or the CDE site and find out who you should be asking. And it would be great for us to have a good relationship with you in advance, so we have a little bit more of an understanding of your program and why you might be making some of these expenses.
I'd
things
like to
change,
just,
understand.
I just want to add to that, that keeping clear records and keeping information will help you go through an FPM in a much better light, because you'll pull up records, you'll pull up your notes, and you'll review that and go, okay, it happened a year ago, but I didn't remember exactly how we got there. And then you'll have those. Really important to keep all of those records. Even in this digital age, you can keep scanned copies of things. And you may never need them, but it's much better to have them and use them and when you need them than try to recreate something that you didn't have all along. So as you go along through your budgeting process, through your accounting processes, etc., keeping those good records and keeping hold of them can really help you in the long run, especially through your FPM process.
Right. And like I said, you have to retain your records for 3 years. And the last 3 years in my life have been a little crazy. I'm not sure about the rest of you, but I'm not sure if I could really be able to speak clearly about, a decision. So it's just nice just to have that right there. The other thing is that you'll be developing good practices and you'll be following the information that we've shared today. And then it'll just become kind of seamless. As soon as you get your award notice or your allocation for CAPE, you'll have a better idea of where you need to spend your money, how you should allocate it, and what you can plan for. And maybe if you have some big project coming up, you might have a better idea of where you can get those funds and which way to supply your program with the best services for your students. Okay, the next slide, actually, we're going to turn over to Steve for function 2700.
Yeah, okay. Well, actually, I think we pretty much covered this. But the point is that professional development is, well, and as I admit, I didn't fully understand until we did this presentation today, just how much of it is covered by 2700. But we are required to do professional development. We are required to indicate that professional development, and they have chosen on the ECR where we dedicate that to. And since we are limited to 5% admin costs, that includes admin costs is really instructional support, as I understand it. Is that correct, Jody?
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear.
The 2700 admin costs, really, the definition is instructional support, which includes non-instructional support.
Non-instructional support,
Yeah.
right. So it's it's related to instruction.
Related to instruction.
But not instruction itself, right?
Right. And so that really means that our professional development budget is limited by that 5%, as I understand it. So that rather curtails what else you can put under admin costs. And so that is really the point we're trying to make here.
And this is actually the wording that you can refer to, as it shows right here. Local administrative costs include planning, administration, providing adult education and literacy services in alignment with local workforce plans, including promoting co-enrollment and carrying out one-stop partner responsibilities, contributions to infrastructure costs. All of those are also included.
Right. Now, I am curious because apparently you are able to apply, negotiate, as it says, for higher admin costs. Since we have Arturo here, I'd be curious to know if people do that, because I've never done it. I never thought, uh-oh, I shouldn't go above 5%, and I made damn sure I never did. But I was just wondering how often it is that people, if it is indeed a common practice to go above that. Could you comment on that for us, Arturo?
Good morning, everyone. Absolutely, Steve. And I was just multitasking. I was trying to find the link here for the supplemental plan frequently asked questions. Seems like it's not working. So I'll either print and upload the frequently asked questions. I'm also going to put a link, if that's okay. I understand this is a CAPE summit or CAPE conference, but I wanted to share the fiscal compliance materials that we offer at the new orientation for administrators. And I think that would be helpful because it's a basic information that I think is useful as this session that is, I'm just so pleased to see how well it's explained for anyone at any level of experience on these subjects. But in any case, so Steve, are we talking about the 5%
Yeah.
administrative cost for WIOA?
Yes.
Yeah, my experience is that most entities, they don't go above the 5%.
Okay.
And I would say the ones that typically go over the 5% is those large agencies. And again, you can go up to 10% if it's justified. And that information is submitted on the ECR, and that's a way the consultant, the CDA consultants will review those expenses, those expenditures, and then by approving the ECR, that is a way to approve the percentage that is above the 5%.
Okay, thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
So in reality, if agencies their expenses under WIOA exceed 5%, often agencies are utilizing other funds to cover those costs and not WIOA because of the limiting 5%. So there may not be many that are going above that 5%. They're simply charging CAPE, or they're charging their CalWorks fund or another fund for some of those administrative costs. Whereas it is allowable with permission, as Arturo had just explained, for you to petition to exceed the 5% and getting permission ahead of time, of course, not after the fact, but applying for that in addition. So, because that has always been kind of a challenge for agencies under the WIOA program, simply because there's a lot of bookkeeping, a lot of administrative costs that are related to WIOA reporting. And so that is something that has always been a challenge for agencies to stay within. So we're happy to hear that there may be some give and take a little bit on that. And I can't use that word flexibility still. It just vocabulary won't let me. Okay,
Yeah,
thank you,
and
Arturo, for sharing that.
Jody,
There's a
yes.
comment that the page is not working, Arturo, the one that you
Yeah,
just showed.
Yeah, thank you. That's the one that I was working on. So, but
Yeah.
just adding a little bit to the 5% for WIOA to professional development. Remember the part that, for example, if you send a teacher to professional development that is related to instruction, like for example, the teacher is taking a Canvas course, that can go directly on the 1,000. It's not that is not part of the professional development 5%. So the 5% rule is on those professional development costs to administer the grant. For example, if you send someone for the orientation for new administrators, and those professional developments that are part of administrating the grant, and that's sometimes that can be confused. But if it's teachers, that is directly to instructions, teachers creating new class materials, all those can be reported on the 1,000, not the administrative piece.
Not the 2,700.
Oh,
Yes,
thank you, Arturo.
yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Steve?
Okay, so this is the point where we kind of wrap things up. I don't know about you, but I found that kind of exhausting. and I would like to share at this point that Jody dragged herself out of bed after 3 or 4 days of flu to make this presentation. And I'm so glad she did, because I never would have been able to pull it off. Anyway,
thanks, Steve.
right. So I just want to cover what the objectives were, which were to give you some kind of understanding that will enable you to communicate more effectively with your district, put you on a level playing field with your financial people, as it were, and as administrator, give you a better ability to monitor your expenditures, avoided the dreaded supplant that Diana was talking about. And the big one, one of the big ones I thought was being able to do an apples to apples comparison between WIOA and CAPE funding, which is important for when you do your in-kind on the ECR. And finally, hopefully, all of this makes you exercise greater fiscal responsibility with confidence as an administrator. And I like the comments that this should be included in administrating, because yes, I definitely would have appreciated having had all this back in the day. And so with that, that's pretty much it. I think we got a technical support slide, and thanks for your presentation. And we have 1 minute for questions, apparently.
So I have
I
a
know-
question for the group. How did we do? Thumbs up. Are we feeling like you're ready to go now? And Arturo shared the correct file. Thank you.
Thank
We
you,
got a
Arturo.
wonderful. We got a great to see you folks. Thank you. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Please
All
do
right.
the evaluation.
Thank you.
Thank
Don't forget the
you.
evaluation is in the link. Please do it. Thanks for the thumbs up.
Jory,
Thanks for joining us and have a great rest of the conference.
Jory, do I have a minute to share the fiscal compliance materials that we?
Go
that
for
we-
it. We're not signing off just yet.
Okay,
Sure.
let me just share that one. Thank you.
Patricia, is he able to share?
He should be able to.
I just,
Thank you.
I just put the files. Thank you,
It looks like
Jory,
he stuck a
Stephen,
PDF in the chat.
and Diana. Excellent presentation.
It's
Thank
in the
you.
chat. So if you're interested in the
Cool.
new administrators orientation.
Let's see if I can.
All
get
right.
to-
Thank you all.
Thank you, everybody.